Welcome to another episode of Unicate Talks, an educational podcast for Unicate College. Today's episode explores a topic that sits right at the frontier of food science and regulation. The Food Standards Agency's work on cell-cultivated products, and, in particular, the role of the Cell-Cultivated Products Sandbox workshops. This is not an episode about whether cell-cultivated foods are good or bad. Instead, it is about understanding how regulation responds when science moves faster than existing rules, and how public safety is protected while innovation is explored. To understand why these sandbox workshops matter, we first need to understand what cell-cultivated products actually are. Cell-cultivated products are foods produced by growing cells, rather than raising whole plants or animals. In the case of cultivated meat, a small number of animal cells are taken and grown under carefully controlled conditions. These cells are supplied with nutrients, oxygen, and the right environment to multiply and form edible tissue. This is fundamentally different from traditional farming, but it is also different from plant-based alternatives. Cell-cultivated products are biological foods produced using biotechnology, cellular biology, and food science combined. Because these foods are so new, they do not fit neatly into existing regulatory categories. They are not conventional meat, they are not genetically modified organisms in the usual sense, and they are not traditional novel foods with long histories of consumption. This creates a challenge for regulators. Food safety systems are designed to protect public health, but they rely on clear definitions, known hazards, and established production processes. When a new technology emerges, regulators need time and evidence to understand how risks might arise and how they can be controlled. This is where the idea of a regulatory sandbox becomes important. A sandbox, in regulatory terms, is a controlled environment where regulators and innovators can work together before products reach the market. It allows questions to be explored safely, openly, and systematically without commercial pressure or public risk. In the case of cell-cultivated products, the sandbox workshops are not about approving products for sale. They are about learning. They create space for regulators to understand how these foods are made in practice, not just in theory. They also allow businesses and scientists to understand what regulators need in order to assess safety, quality, and consumer protection. One of the key areas explored in the sandbox workshops is hygiene and food safety management. Traditional food production relies heavily on systems like hazard analysis and critical control points, often referred to as HACCP. These systems identify where hazards might occur and how they can be prevented, controlled, or monitored. The workshops explored how these familiar principles apply to cell-cultivated production. Even though the technology is new, the underlying safety questions remain the same. Where could contamination occur? How are raw materials controlled? What happens if a process deviates from expected conditions? By examining these questions, regulators can assess whether existing hygiene frameworks can be adapted or whether additional guidance is needed. Another major focus of the sandbox workshops is the production process itself. Cell-cultivated foods involve several stages, including cell sourcing, cell growth, harvesting, and processing into a final food product. Each stage introduces its own potential risks and controls. For example, regulators need to understand where cells come from, how they are stored, how growth conditions are maintained, and how consistency is ensured across batches. These are not abstract concerns. They are practical food safety questions. The workshops allow regulators to see how companies currently manage these processes, what safeguards are already in place, and where further evidence may be required. Labeling has also been a central topic in the sandbox discussions. Because cell-cultivated products are new, there is no single agreed term that everyone recognizes or understands. Words like cultivated, cell-cultured, or lab-grown can carry very different meanings for consumers. Regulators have to balance accuracy, clarity, and consumer understanding. Labels must not mislead, but they must also communicate what the product is in a way that makes sense. The sandbox workshops explore how language influences perception, how labeling rules might apply, and how consumer transparency can be maintained without creating unnecessary confusion or fear. Toxicology and growth media are another important area explored through the sandbox. Cell-cultivated production relies on growth media to support cell development. Regulators need to understand what these substances are, how they behave, and how safety can be demonstrated. This does not mean assuming risk, but it does mean applying established toxicological principles to new contexts. The workshops allow these scientific discussions to happen early, before products reach the approval stage. Regulatory approval pathways are also being examined through the sandbox. In the UK, cell-cultivated products are not currently authorized for sale. For them to be approved, regulators must be confident that safety assessments are robust, consistent, and evidence-based. The sandbox workshops help map how cell-cultivated products might move through existing approval systems, what evidence would be needed, and where guidance must be clarified or developed. What is particularly notable about this approach is that it reflects a regulatory system that is proactive rather than reactive. Instead of waiting for applications to arrive and then struggling to interpret them, regulators are actively engaging with the science and the industry early. This helps ensure that when decisions are eventually made, they are informed by real understanding rather than assumptions. From a broader perspective, the Sandbox program shows how food regulation can support innovation without compromising safety. Public trust in food systems depends on confidence that new products are thoroughly assessed. At the same time, scientific innovation will continue to reshape how food is produced. The Sandbox workshops sit at that intersection. They allow learning, dialogue, and evidence building to take place before products reach consumers. As a podcast topic, this is powerful because it shows regulation as a living process, not a barrier, but a framework that adapts as science evolves. For learners, educators, and professionals, the Sandbox workshops offer a real-world example of how food science, biotechnology, and policy interact. They demonstrate that good regulation is not about stopping progress, but about shaping it responsibly. In the coming years, what is learned through these workshops will influence how cell-cultivated products are assessed, labeled, and potentially introduced to the UK food system. Whether or not these products become mainstream, the Sandbox program itself sets an important precedent for how future food technologies can be evaluated. It shows that safety, transparency, and innovation do not have to compete. They can be developed together through careful conversation, scientific scrutiny, and thoughtful regulation. Thank you for listening to Unicate Talks, a podcast for Unicate College. This episode has explored the purpose, structure, and significance of the Cell-Cultivated Products Sandbox workshops, offering insight into how modern food regulation prepares for the future while protecting public health. Until next time, stay informed and stay curious.